Tati, can you confirm whether we're live on YouTube yet?
Right now, let me turn my volume all the way down. Yes, ma'am, we are.
Okay. Great. Okay. I think 3 minutes have passed, right?
Nope, 1 minute left.
Oh, okay. So what we want. Okay. Sade, can you please put up the presentation? This is probably a really good time to welcome Sade. So Sade is going to be assisting us with some text. So thank you very much, Sade. And this is going to be awesome. All right, everyone. Hi, welcome back to the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read. As you know, I'm Njeri here with Tati and Isis, and we are your co-leads, co-admins, Holy Trinity, I don't know, for the Octavia Butler Slow Read.
Not
so
holy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being patient with us with our start. So we're here to discuss Survivor, which, as we all know, is the, to my knowledge, the only book that Octavia E. Butler said that she didn't want to be reprinted. So it is it's a great opportunity to talk about a work that many of us are reading for the very first time, and also an opportunity to, have this conversation with some grace, and even sort of not only talk about the book, but also talk about, what it meant for Octavia E. Butler to express her wishes about this book in this particular way, and then for us to be reading it. So that's a sort of added layer to what we're going to be talking about today. And also, we have a very, very special guest today who is joining us, and that is Ayanna Jameson, who is the founder of the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network. And so she's going to be speaking with us as well. And I think, so Ayanna, first of all, thank you very much for being here and for speaking to us, and in particular, speaking to us in light of the book that we are currently on in our slow read journey. I can't think of any better time to have someone like you to help us frame how we even talk about Survivor in this particular moment. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll do a more formal introduction in a few minutes. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Take it away, Tati.
Here we have our dedication to the wonderful and underrated Octavia Estelle Butler. You wrote for freedom, yours and ours. We honor this when we read slowly, luxuriously, and collectively, exactly as you had imagined. We are your legacy.
Isis, can you take us through the agenda?
Sure. So welcome, everyone. Glad that you're here. So we just had the dedication, and we'll discuss the group agreements. So then we'll have the book chat. So Ayanna Jameson from the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network will give us some contextualization for Survivor. Then each of the hosts will do our own personal reflections of the book. If you have the thoughts as we go through our reflections, definitely please drop them in the chat. And depending on the final number, we'll break out into 3 breakout rooms, or maybe we'll be central. We'll come back together and do a group engagement. So we'll do a sound circle. We'll end with group selfies, potentially some announcements, and that will be that.
Thank you. So you'll recall, for those of you who have been with us for a while, we have the same group agreement that we have always had. And for those of you who are new, here's what we would like to do to create a space where we can meaningfully talk about Octavia E. Butler's work. So first of all, the first group agreement is to center by Black, Indigenous, and people of color's voices. The voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color will be centered in this space. That is important to us because we are honoring Octavia E. Butler's work, and she wrote for a particular audience and from her own perspective as a Black woman living in the US. And so we want to honor that in the way we talk about her work, recognizing that in particular this historical moment, it's important for our voices to be centered. Secondly, speak mindfully. So recognizing that this is being recorded, it is being live streamed, we are on camera, we all have different ways of communicating and different levels of comfort with communicating over video. So please speak mindfully, especially if you're somebody who's very comfortable speaking on a platform such as this, and also share space, recognizing that the chat is going to be happening simultaneously, and there might be individuals who will use the chat exclusively. So create space for those voices to be integrated with yours. Hatred will not be tolerated. That's self-explanatory. Any propagators of racism, transphobia, and other forms of hatred will be removed, no questions asked, and will not be allowed to come back to our space. I'll add to that if you see something, it's kind of cliche now, if you see something, say something. But if you are noticing that something is happening in our discussion that the host may not have noticed, please bring that to the attention of the host. We are happy to intervene and to respond if we don't notice it first. And share responsibly. So we do encourage you to share your excitement, your joys, your frustration with what we're reading or anything over social media. We appreciate that, but please share responsibly. So if you want to take a screenshot or if you want to tweet something that has been said, make sure that you ask permission and that you attribute if that's what the person would like you to do. Just be really mindful that we want to share responsibly. And of course, all of these group agreements are founded in this overarching principle that has come out of Octavia E. Butler's work, which is that all that you touch, you change, all that you change changes you, as spoken by Lauren Oya Olamina in Parable of the Sower. And we are all touching each other for the next 2 hours in a number of different ways. Some of us might be sharing things that are quite vulnerable. Some of us might paying back. So in doing that, let's be intentional about the ways that we are creating and co-creating space here today. Tati, do you want to go ahead?
It would help if I unmuted. Okay. As we are moving into the sharing portion of our live today, please get your book ready. I know some of us, one of us, I think, has an actual physical copy of Survivor. For the rest of us, we have it on our Kindles, but make sure that you have it available because we will be taking a group selfie later on. And if you would feel open to doing so, we will be having a sound circle at the end of our discussion when we come back into the main room. So if you have flagged or would like to take the time during the discussion to look through and flag a section that you would like to share and read in the sound circle, please be sure to do that. This is a full-on live discussion about this book. So there will be spoilers. So if you have not finished the book, not read the book, yet decided to join us in the discussion today, we are accepting you with the understanding that you are open to being spoiled about the details of the story, as well as our thoughts on those details. And again, as Njeri said, if you notice something, say something. We as facilitators have a lot of things that we are paying attention to. We're paying attention to you all to make sure that you feel comfortable. We're paying attention to the chat a little bit. I'm also paying attention to the YouTube chat and trying to check other messages as they come in. So please don't feel nervous about saying something to us if you feel uncomfortable. There is the option in the chat on Zoom to send a message directly to us. So if you don't want to send it to the entire group, you can click our name in the chat box to send the message directly to us. Yeah, that's it.
So we are currently reading the Patternist series. It's a group of science fiction novels that detail a secret history continuing from the ancient Egyptian period to the far future that involves telepathic mind control and an extraterrestrial plague. We are currently on Survivor, which all of you have been able to get through SistahSciFi and obviously can still get and encourage people to buy through SistahSciFi. Now, Octavia Butler, Butler expressed a dislike for the novel Survivor and declined to bring it back into print. So, oh, sorry, Tati, you were supposed to do this. So just keep in mind, keep that in mind, and we want to make sure that that is something that we're graceful about and are considerate about as we discuss. So for those of you who would like a refresher, this is the brief synopsis of Survivor. They fled from an Earth ravaged by plague and violence, seeking to fulfill their holy mission to discover a new home for humanity. But instead of landing in a peace-filled paradise, Earth's missionaries find themselves caught between two warring civilizations, the Garkon and the Tekon. And only one of the people from Earth, a young girl and converted missionary named Alana, has the proper survival training to see through the lies of the Garkon hosts, who extend the hand of friendship to the humans only to enslave them. Alana alone can understand the necessity of becoming one with the Tekon enemy, and perhaps she can find a way to release the missionaries from the deadly bondage into which they have complacently fallen. Yet, even if she succeeds, will Alana merely be saving them for a still more inescapable doom? Dun, dun, dun. I guess that's can be one of our discussion questions. All right, so we thought that before we got into the discussion and before the host shared their views, we would have our special guest share her views and tell us a little bit more about the work of the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network. So as I mentioned, Ayanna Jameson is the founder of the Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network. And we can mute that person. The OEB Legacy Network is an organization that Ayanna, if I may call you by your first name, founded in 2011 during her doctoral research on Octavia E. Butler. The network maintains a digital presence as a community to gather, share information, and talk about Octavia E. Butler, her legacy, and the things that they're doing that reflect some of the principles in her writing. And there are many different professionals who make up the network. And I just want to thank you very much, Ayanna, for being here. So I wanted to maybe ask you to start by sharing a little bit more about the work of the network, perhaps currently, and introduce it to individuals who might want to learn more about it and potentially become involved.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I feel like the work that you're doing is part of her legacy, and you name that, and it's so special and so essential and so important that people read slowly. Octavia was a person who wrote slowly and really took her time and rewrote. And I think it's really appropriate for us to introduce Survivor, because Survivor survived even though she had some reservations about it being reproduced. So you can find Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network on Twitter at OEB Legacy. You can find us on Tumblr at OEB Legacy, and on Instagram, OEB.legacy. And really, we just try to be present and be available there's many different programs that Moya Bailey and I participate in. Actually, Moya has a book that just came out called Transform Misogynoir, which the phrase that she's famous for coining that specifically relates to the ways that Black women are targeted and for a particular kind of intersectional hatred and abuse that really had not been named as such before, especially since intersectionality had to do with so many different combinations of the ways that people are oppressed. So Moya has a book out. Moya is the digital alchemist for Octavia Butler Legacy Network. She curates the digital content on Tumblr, and really we collaborate in a very Butlerian way. And what I mean by that is that we work in a way that's less hierarchical and is with intention, that we lift one another up and include community and meet instead of making unilateral decisions. So things sometimes take longer, but ultimately we feel that we're working ethically and sharing scholarship with like-minded folks who are not trying to just get ahead or grab something and reproduce something and make statements. So when I speak of Octavia, it's with the same kind of intention and the same kind of community agreement that you have, and that I'm going to center the voices of women of color, Black, Indigenous folks. I'm going to make space and allow voices of queer folks and not gender non-conforming folks and people of various femininities and masculinities to express themselves in the ways that they feel appropriate. And also really what we've done is partner with larger institutions that do not always have us in mind. So we sort of act as a buffer to kind of call people to attention about the voices and people that are not being included in their spaces. I think it's worked out well. We've had some major conferences at different institutions, but also we do small things like we celebrate Octavia Butler's birthday. We have this season of change that goes from the day of her passing or transition, February 24th until June 22nd. And then we have another period of time from June 22nd until Lauren Olamina's birthday, because if we were to jump across timelines or in this current timeline, she was born in 2009. So she's about to be 11, right? 12, anyway. So she is a child who is coming up in this world, having just experienced COVID and being at home, learning in her living room, like my children were. So we really think about the ways that her work is in the now, drawing from the past and looking toward our collective future. So if you want to get involved, follow us on social media. We also have a Patreon, and I am about to celebrate 10 years of Octavia Butler Legacy Network. We've been around since 2011, and really we're going to make Octavia Butler Legacy Network sustainable and into the future, and really start to share some scholarship. And what I mean by scholarship is the things that I discovered growing up in the locations where she lived and where she took the buses. I live in the San Gabriel Valley, right along those mountains where the parables take place, where Mind of My Mind takes place, where Parable of the Sower takes place. And really, I've been able to extract a lot of meaning and understanding from her writing through my existence here. And I love sharing that with people. But really, even more than that, her content, like things that inspired her work. So that's where I'm at now. And so I love hearing from people, and I love knowing when people have been around, like, oh, I was at this thing, because I don't always, like the host said here, I don't always get to see everyone's face. I don't always get to talk to everyone, and I'm usually doing multiple tasks, but there are people who have been to things over the last 10 years while we've been celebrating and building our community that I just love being in connection with. There's people doing all kinds of work, so please join us.
Thank you. It's super inspiring, and I think, and what we'll do is we will share the contact information for the Legacy Network through our email. So that will be an opportunity for people to find out more. And please keep us posted if there are going to be like any special events to celebrate the 10-year birthday of the Legacy Network, which is amazing. So we're here because we made the decision that we would read Survivor. Thankfully, SistahSciFi was able to get a digital copy of the book and make it available, widely available for the first time since it was originally printed and made available in 1978, I think, so this is a big deal that we were able to access the book through SistahSciFi's efforts. And so, but there's some mist around Survivor, right? Because it's really the only book that she's written, at least in my knowledge, that, you know, she was really reluctant. She didn't want it to exist beyond its first print. What can you tell us about what happened? What Octavia E. Butler's reasons were for doing that? Was there anything through your work in the Legacy Network that, you know, will help you give us some more insights about her reasons and her feelings about this book?
Sure. So if we think about the time when Survivor was I was just looking at something coming up in the chat. So when we think about the time when this book was published, it was published in 1978, if that's correct. And then Kindred was published in 1979. And these two books come in a sequence where we had Pattern Master was 1976. Then we had 1980, we had Wild Seed, I believe. And then I think 1981 or I'd have to look, but we had the Patternist series that had been written when she was a teen. So age 13, 14, 15. So the seeds of these novels had already been planted, so to speak. And when she wrote Survivor, she really, she was still really honing her craft. And it was such an early book that she felt that she needed one more or two more passes at editing the novel, but she felt this urge to take the advance that she got from Survivor and use it to do the research for Kindred. Kindred is her most, Kindred is her work that was the most pressing, meaning like she knew she needed to write it. And so she felt that she sold the book too soon because she was still a relatively unknown writer, even though she published several books. So she felt like she could have edited it more. She called it her Star Trek novel, meaning that she had these people land on this planet and find other people there. Everyone can breathe the same air, and then they start reproducing. So she felt like she hadn't worked out the science of it well enough or explained how some of these things happened. And it sort of skipped a lot of the steps that she would have taken if she had had more time or the economic prosperity not to need to take that money. So if you guys want to read more, if folks want to read more about this process for her, you can look at, there is here it is. So this book, Strange Mating, as you can see, it's like tabs. So there's an interview that was previously unpublished in this edited volume. And it's an interview between Nisi Shawl, the author and friend of Octavia, and Octavia E. Butler. And what Octavia says in here is that she sold the book too soon and she felt that she needed more time. So you can see in her own words the way that she works through that. But really, she used the money to, and I don't have the quantity, the amount of money on hand, right? Like I know how much you got for Kindred and how, even though they promised her in advance, they didn't actually pay her for a while and she had to make long distance phone calls to New York to get her money and things like that. But with Survivor, she took a Greyhound bus with that money. She took a Greyhound bus from LA, Pasadena, out to Maryland because she wanted to do research for the book. So she wanted to go to this plantation. And it was at a particular time when I don't think she could get into the place where she originally planned, and she stayed in this place where she called it Hotel Sleazy. She said there were cigarette burns in the tables, and it was just a seedy place. It was not, I don't know if it was unsanitary, but she did not feel good there. And she also said that she went down from like 2 meals a day down to like 1 meal a day. So she really, the amount of money that she got for Survivor was not a lot, right? If you're thinking about the prices of a Greyhound bus to go cross country, which had to have taken a very long time, right, to travel those thousands of miles. And then once she got there, I don't think she had a camera. So she was taking notes about how how things looked, the kinds of things that she saw, how there were the quarters of the enslaved, and how there were euphemisms used on the tour or in the research. She went to the library and the historical society in different places. So this amount of money, she needed it, and she stretched it as far as she possibly could. So she felt that for economic reasons, she had to put this book out there, even though in her heart, she knew that it needed more work. But I have to say, I don't know if I agree with all of her decisions. And I think she was a much harder critic on herself and her ability as a writer. She was harder on herself than she needed to be, because Survivor is such a rich offering, even with whatever problems that she said she didn't enjoy, and the embarrassment or a little bit of shame that she felt about it. But I feel like that shame is attached to maybe being poor and needing the money more than per se the work, because the work is really still beautifully written, and the culture in Survivor is so rich. If folks have read A Necessary Being and the other short story offered in Unexpected Stories that were released in 2015, you can see just how her genius at creating cultures that were non-human, that had their own customs, their own way of mating, and their own rituals. It was just so beautiful that this world, the seeds of this world had been planted. And she wrote this very early short story when she was at Clarion, and it got sold, but then never released for a long, long, long time. So I really think this is such a great book for people to read, to think about the ways that humans are not the center of the universe, and that they don't have the only sense of morality, and that there are other ways of being in the world aside the heteronormative patriarchy. It's not you can layer meaning on top of it, but you're really looking at another culture from the outside. And Alana has to deal with this other culture from the inside. Yeah, there are some issues with it in terms of like consent and assault and all of these really complicated issues. But when you think about a young writer, I don't know about any of you, but when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, or even 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, these were not the sophisticated kind of short stories and depth of engagement. My writing was not this sophisticated, right? So this is even more sophisticated than other people who are widely published. So I really appreciate and enjoy it in ways that maybe people don't. And also my first niece, her name is Alana with only one N. It's Alona. And I find all of these little synchronicities between my own life and my research, and then the writing and research that Octavia did. So it's always very encouraging for me, I think. And the person is a she's a hybridized identity. I'm not gonna say biracial or multicultural, because I don't like those words. I don't find those words useful, but I do find a lot of value in this, and I'm really happy that people are reading it.
Ayana, I've heard you speak a number of times, and every time I hear you speak about Octavia E. Butler, I feel like I'm talking to somebody with such like an intimate relationship with her, and such a care and for her and a regard for her. So it's just it's so beautiful to encounter her through your experience and through your research. I wanted to ask you two questions about Survivor. The first, given the context that led to her publishing the story and her views about when it was published and not wanting to be reprinted, how can we, as a community of readers who are slowly and luxuriously reading Octavia E. Butler's work, how can we approach the conversations that we're going to be having very shortly about the book? And then secondly, what did you think of it? Now, you've answered both of those questions already, so feel free if there's nothing new to add, that's totally cool. But is there anything else that you'd like to share beyond what you already have shared as some guidance for us as we, break out into our groups and have conversation about the book?
Sure. I would encourage people to think about your young self. Think about your young self or folks that you knew in your youth or in a time before now, any time before now, and the advice that you would give yourself or a choice that you would make, not a regret, but just some advice that you would give your younger self. And I think it'll help you to have compassion for this young Octavia E. Butler, who really was finding herself and finding her way. And I do think this book, Survivor, more than other books that she'd published already. And then we don't see this again really until Parable of the Sower, when we see Lauren. Alana is rejecting the fundamentalism of the folks who have adopted her and taken her in. And she also realizes that these folks have made her life safer in a way, and that she was what she's calling a wild human. She's basically living on the streets and has been assaulted and dealt with, these really desperate conditions. And that they have improved her life, but also that she doesn't have to take everything that they're telling her as wholesale. Like, she shouldn't feel guilty for not going along with the things that they think. And I think that's a theme that does come up in other books, and she articulates it. But I feel like this is a very young Octavia who's coming up with these ideas and rejecting these things in a very thoughtful way for such a young person. At this point in her sort of research, people don't realize that Octavia E. Butler was a researcher. She was a scholar. She was a scholar of biblical archetypes. So she had read and researched and looked at verses and scholarly texts about what kinds of relationships and archetypes were interacting in, let's say, the disciples of Jesus Christ and things like that. So she had already sort of removed her, not removed, but nor rejected wholesale, but she was already seeing her Baptist upbringing for what it was and the things that she could value from it and what things were useful and uplifting and intricate, and the things that she thought were not explained to her in a way that she found satisfactory. So I just feel like as you read, I don't feel bad about reading it. I don't feel bad that it's out there. I think it's part of her work. There are a couple of other novels or that weren't published that I feel that people should read. Just like there's a discovery that I think Jack London wrote a werewolf novel, but that his estate will not publish it. I feel like that also shows facets of the author, and we can have compassion for ourselves when we look at what the novel does and what it doesn't do, and really look at it as it fits into her whole oeuvre of work, and see it from that perspective as part of the case study of of knowledge that she is working through and the information she's working through, if that makes sense. I hope that adds to what I said and I'm not just being repetitive. Njeri, does that answer your question? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I thank you for that. Yeah, I think yeah, especially like the compassion piece and, you know, I'm just thinking about myself 20 years ago. And if I'd written something, how would I feel? How would I want to be treated? How would I want to treat myself about something that I wrote? How do I treat myself about things that I wrote before I, you know, came into different understandings or questioned things about myself or the society? So I do very much appreciate that. So I want to thank you very, 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 very much, Ayanna, for spending time with us in this way. And I hope that for everybody who is watching over YouTube and watching here in the Zoom, and then who will be watching in the replay, I hope that this will encourage you to read Survivor if you haven't had an opportunity to, or if you're rereading Survivor, if it hopefully this adds some more background and context and dimension to your understanding of the work. So Ayanna, you are absolutely welcome to stay and be a part of our discussions if you have the time to do so. So please do. But we are going to be moving on now to our hosts giving some feedback, likely influenced by what you've shared with us today. So again, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing through the Legacy Network, that you're doing personally, and the time that you're spending helping people understand more about Octavia E. Butler's work and to continue to get richness from it. So thank you very much.
And hey, Njeri, there was a comment in the chat that I wanted to bring up because I think it relates to the work that you're doing, Ayanna. So the comment was, please plan an official tour of Octavia Butler's journey if you have the space to do so. And I remember before COVID, there was a fellowship based in LA, which kind of was supposed to look at some of the key points in Pasadena. So I don't know if that's related to this comment and if you wanted to speak to that.
Sure. So part of the way that I developed the, one of the things that Octavia E. Butler Legacy Network has done is I created these legacy tours, and I've done this multiple times with like busloads of people or just, you know, one person in the car, but really just driving through Pasadena and surrounding areas, showing where she lived, places she went to school, her public library, her final resting place, and just looking at the place and how it shows up in her life and in her work. And so those things happen. I'm sure that, you know, after COVID, we will have similar things. Actually, there was a class of college students that were going to come and do an immersive Octavia experience for a long weekend and attend some events, but the way that COVID occurred, we couldn't do that. But I certainly, you know, that's one of the reasons why people should kind of keep track of what we're doing, because when there are opportunities to share that knowledge, I always love to just introduce people to the location. But yes, I think there may be something in the works where I know that there was an article written, and I have to double check this and ask Linnell George, who also has another book that just came out about Octavia that everyone should read about her as a writer. But there were some like digital sites and photographs and things that were created that show places that she lived and her mother lived. So those things are available, and I'll try to put those back into our social media rotation for people to sort of see it. But yeah, I do legacy tours, and it's a wonderful experience just to get really immersed in her work and just see some of the things that inspired her. So thank you for bringing up that question. But if anyone has any other questions or comments before I leave, I think I will take my leave, but I'm happy to take any questions if you'll have time in your schedule, or if I can stay for a couple of minutes if there are any other things that you guys would like me to address.
So we can, why don't we just say that we'll stop at the top of the hour, so that would be 2 Eastern. So 10 more minutes, and if anybody has questions or comments, then that's the time that we can put for that, if that works.
Sure. And I want to hear your insights about the book as well. That's also why I'm hanging around, because it's very rare that I get to discuss this book with people. So
I don't see any other questions right now in the Zoom chat. I don't, Tati, are there some on YouTube?
Yeah, if there are questions that are posted while we're sharing, we can filter back to
that. So Josh, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question, if I may. You mentioned the possibility of publishing her previous works that were never published, and possibly even this one. And I guess the question I have is, how would you suggest that they go about doing that in a way that would encourage the reader to read that in a reflective way, as opposed to it causing new readers to pick it up and use it, and to look at it and use it to judge her work as a whole, rather than using it as a way, as an amendum, I guess, to better appreciate her work that already exists. I mean, I'm not saying this very well, but basically, what if people pick it up and they then judge her other work based off of this new work because they don't appreciate the fact that they need to see it, I guess, in the right context?
Well, publishing unpublished items and all of that kind of stuff is totally up to her estate. They make those decisions, so I don't have any control over that. But I do think if they do reissue it, or they issue unpublished works, maybe they'll offer some kind of essay. Like there's a Library of America compilation of some books that have all of her short stories, and I think Fledgling and one other book included in the volume. And so they get writers and scholars to make commentary before they reissue things. So I don't know what their plans are in terms of that. But I would say be wary of anyone who talks down about an author's work based on one work, I would say. And because when people are critiquing a work, and this is what I tell my undergrads too, your dislike of a film or whatever was assigned does have a lot to do with you as a person. And you can say like, oh, I would have done it differently, but you cannot say that the author did it wrong. Because I mean, this is just, you know, respectful and valid critique 101. So I don't know what they're planning on doing, but I definitely think it can be done. I saw another question flash by, but I did not catch it. I don't know if it's addressed to me.
Yeah, it was a question asking where a reasonably priced copy of Survivor could be obtained, and I answered it in the chat, basically stating that if you are purchasing a print copy at this point, because it has not been reprinted since 1978, you're likely purchasing from a collector. So it's a commodity. So as at this point, unless it is reprinted by someone in her estate who has decided that they would bless us with the reprint, the reasonably priced option would be the digital copy. And Njeri happened to luck up on her copy at a convention. So go to book cons and talk to people who sell vintage books. That's another option.
The copy that I have is a photocopy of a library book. And then I hadn't photocopied it properly. So when I was reading it, I was like, there's a gap here. And then I found some digital copy to like print out the little sentences and put it in my photocopy. It's low class, but it does the job. Because I wasn't going to write in the library book either, but I was researching for my dissertation. So I was going to read it no matter what. And it fits in the story. Yes, Linnell George's book is beautiful, and it has so many pictures of everyday objects and other objects from Octavia's life that really will, you know, give you, again, more compassion for your younger self and your present self as you evolve and grow. So I'm happy to stay around for 5 more minutes, but I don't want to take up your time. And I really want to know what the three of you think about the book, because I really want to know your take, especially given that you've read it already, and that you hear what I had to say about it.
Okay. Sade, can you please stop screen sharing? I apologize to the people on YouTube. It looks from my phone that you're only really seeing a small part of Ayana's face. I didn't realize that, so I apologize for that. Thanks. Okay, so our next section is exactly that. So who would like to start? Anybody bursting to share their thoughts while
You know
Ayana
I'm
is
good to
here?
go, but I always go first. So.
Okay.
Well, it's between you and Isis.
Yeah, I'll go first because I was really excited to discuss Clay's art, but I'm really excited to discuss Survivor in a very different way. I was a little bit scared to read it because, reading all of Octavia E. Butler's reservations about the book, I think I'll go discuss, but I was happy to read it, and I wanted to read it because to see the development of such literally a genius level writer, right? And I think for me, as anybody, as Ayana was saying, operating in the world, that ability to see your growth. So I was excited to see Octavia Butler's growth. So that I'm glad that we included it in the slow read and that we're able to read it and we're discussing it now. There are a couple of observations that happened as I read Survivor. One of the first things is like, there's a hole in the Patternish trilogy as I read it today, or previously, and it's called Survivor, right? So Survivor kind of linked a lot of things between what happened in Clay's arc and what will happen in the Pattern Master for me. Two, I love the society that she created with the Gurkhan and the Tekhans, right? This hierarchy based off of color, the importance of the shades of blue, how they emote with shades of white as positive emotions and alignment and approval, and shades of yellow like pain and fear and shame. How that demonstrates itself with age, or not feeling well or being hurt, and therefore becoming yellow. How she describes their physicality in comparison to like the human form, and how we see it from the perception of like the missionaries and Ayana and the Gurkhan and the Tekhan, and how the differences play an interplay and how they align in society. So I love that. I really appreciated Alana's character, like a lot of characters in Octavia Butler. She's strong, she's smart. I wouldn't say she's necessarily the most trustworthy, but she is super loyal. Like, she's loyal to her missionary parents, because she could have been like, I'm pretty good. Like, I hope y'all figure this planet out. But she really took on a lot of risks to save not only her parents, but that whole missionary community. And the treatment of the community was kind of not so equitable to Alana, especially beyond her parents. And I don't think they were ever fully accepting of her. I think another thing that I really appreciated about, because at one point I was like, why is Ayana so tethered to Jorit and to the Tekhan community, right? And to me, this is what I appreciated the most about Survivor. It really taught you that in one society, something that they would judge as inferior, not acceptable, completely immoral. So in this case, it's the fact that Ayana is a fighter, that because she was a wild human, she didn't necessarily have those innate or quite as internalized restraints about her sexuality. That made her bad. They made her very bad in the missionary society, but were actually all pluses in the Tekhan society, and set her up for a role of respectability, where she's, in a romantic entanglement with the leader of the tribe, right? And ends up having their child. Oh, sorry, Alana. Thank you for that correction. So that was super exciting. And I think one thing that I saw in Survivor that is repeated in several other books is that for Alana to mature as a leader, she had to have a pivotal break from her father figure. So you saw that in her deciding to be with the Tarkhan. We see that in Parable of the Sword with Lauren Armino, where she's like, I have a religion, it's very different than yours. That was a critical step to her becoming a leader. We saw that in Clay's arc with Kira and her deciding that she's okay with being impregnated with these and having a Clay's arc baby, which is something that her father was very much opposed to. And we also see that in Mind of My Mind, where Mary has to destroy Doro to become a leader in her own right. So it was interesting to see that theme of at some point there's for our female protagonists to really step into their own as a leader, that there's a philosophical break from their parental figure. So yeah, I enjoyed the book for those reasons. I'm done now.
Cool. Tati, do you want to go?
Okay. I was very excited to read this, as I have shared with those of you who've been here before. We are at the last two books with Survivor and Pattern Master that I have left to read in Octavia E. Butler's bibliography. So it's bittersweet that I was able to get my hands on it. Thank you, Isis. And then also just reaching this major milestone for me in something that I was really hoping to delay for a long time coming. But in reading this, I found myself, and every time that I read a book by Butler, my goal is to find myself, some aspect of me in the main character. And I look for that in every book, but particularly in Octavia Butler books because I'm obsessed with her. So I wanted to find the things about myself that resonated, or the things about Alana that resonated with me as a person. And also the things about the humans who are going to this planet and escaping this plague situation that was started by a doctor who thought he knew everything in Clay's arc and could just fix everything. And no, idiot, you can't. I curse. So that's going to happen as I get excited. Warning for those of you who have not been here before, seen my videos. So that was one of the things that I really took notice of in Octavia Butler stating herself that this was her Star Trek novel. And I mentioned it in one of the slow read that I participated in on Njeri's channel, is that, you know, you go to this completely different planet and everything matches what we need as, you know, as humans. The air fits, the typography fits, the food fits, or it supports the food, the seeds that we bought to make our own food. It supports our animals. Like the ecosystem just works for us as humans. But what these humans, missionaries that I put in quotation marks, find is that they've escaped this plague on the planet that they have lived on forever, and found themselves in the middle of a conflict on a completely different planet between two civilizations that they have no understanding of, yet still managed to think that these two civilizations who have been living on and cultivating this planet their entire existence are dumber than they are. Like, where do you even get off in asking, like when Dayut breaks his arm in a fight, oh, you all know dumbass Dr. Nathan. The doctors are so stupid in these stories. They're also men. Just think, oh, you all can fix a broken arm. We've been living here for centuries and we've never had broken appendages before. No, we're completely ignorant on how to handle that. Like that kind of thing, that ignorance that maintains itself in humans, but it's also something that needs to be seen, because we need to see our own ignorance in dealing with civilizations and cultures that we don't know anything about. And instead of approaching it with what we know of ourselves and trying to impress that upon another culture, take in what that culture has to give you. The thing that I love about the character Alana is that she's always been a survivor. Even before they left Earth, she managed to survive on her own. Her parents are killed during the conflict between the Clayarchs, which, don't even get me started on how Clay Dana's legacy is now a plague. I'm so bothered by that. My flying human who transitioned late in life, he deserved more. He deserved more. But her parents are killed by this, and she's been living on the fringes of society as a wild human who is a homeless child, a street urchin. And she's taken in by this community and taking in with the expectation that we're going to convert you to be like us. Still ignorance in accepting this person on our own views of what acceptance is. And Alana finds herself in meeting the Tekon and becoming the one person who survives this huge detox situation, which I loved the explanation of how the detox makes them feel. Because if you've ever known anyone who has had an addiction issue and have had the opportunity to listen to how they feel physically and mentally as they are dealing with withdrawal, that, like, yeah, on it. But to be the one person who has survived the detox of this drug that they have been ingesting in many different ways. And we see when she comes back to the missionary colony, how many they eat the fruit. They drink tea made out of the fruit. The fruit is put into their bread. Like, in every aspect of what they take in, they're taking in this fruit. And the dependence that they have built or has been built up in them that they don't even know. But Alana survives this detox situation and finds herself once again taken away. She's in this community of people who are completely different from her, who in this case seem to look at her and want to take her as she is, but also make her able to withstand the vicissitudes and the difficulties that come along with being in this environment. And it's a different kind, it's still a kind of conditioning, but it's a different kind of conditioning, because the idea is that at some point she's going to be able to sustain and fit into this community on her own without being dependent upon everybody else who's in that community. She's going to have to hunt differently, but she's going to have more power than the other missionaries, because they've taught her how to use her body and her strength to her favor in dealing with these wild beasts that they come into contact with that they manage to live off of. So I'm like rambling. This will probably be the most of my 10 minutes that I have ever used in talking about this, because I'm so excited to have read it and to see this in Alana and know and understand that these are things that her determination and how she looked at the two. She's the one person in this missionary situation who is able to actually look at the totality of the situation and understand that I can't make this what I want it to be. I have to figure out how to exist among these people and be part of their civilization, not make them part of mine. And I don't think that that is a mindset that the missionaries, and I don't think that's a mindset that humans, period, take on when it comes to bringing themselves into new environments. We want to make people like us instead of coming to understand how like us people already are, other people already are, and building on those likenesses. So yeah, that's one thing that I really loved about her, and the ability to say deuces and know that what her decision was not going to be acceptable to her foster parents, who adopt her adoptive parents, and not being so caught up on being acceptable to them to be able to walk into her new life. And I was sad when I got to the end because it felt unfinished and I wanted to know more of what happened with Alana, but also understanding that Octavia Butler, number one, doesn't do direct sequels. And she leaves us with those questions when the stories are over. And those questions are important. So I'm still thinking about and making notes about those questions. Like, my notes in my book journal are about 4 pages deep and I'm still noting. So there will be more notes that happen after today. So yeah, I'm going to shut up because I'm excited. And it's your turn, Njeri.
Cool. So So I want to talk about some themes that I found really compelling. The first theme is in the form of a question, which is what are you willing to pay for freedom? What are you willing to sacrifice for emancipation? And that question came out when the missionaries were like at the point where, you know, the missionaries had to think about whether they would flee, whether they would you know, go through the withdrawal from Mekla, what life would be like afterwards. So when DU comes and says like, so here's a plan, right? And this is what it's going to take, and you're enslaved right now, so this is what you got to do. So that moment, that time, you know, got me thinking about that question. What is freedom worth? What are you willing to risk in order to get free? And I think that question is a question that a lot of Octavia E. Butler's works cause us to ask. The second theme that I found really interesting was this theme of community and hierarchy and power, and how different communities figure that out. And I think particularly in the Patternist series, like unlike some of the other series that she's written, this series, I think, gives us the most options. Like it seems to be presenting different patterns of community, or for community, for power, for hierarchy, for organizing people. And in this particular book, unlike I think in Wild Seed, we see to a certain extent like Doro versus Anyanwu's way of doing things. In Mind of My Mind, we see Mary's way of doing things, and sort of Emma, you know, in the background, kind of. In Clay's arc, that was sort of a wild kind of mess, but we see a number of different, you know, communities. And then here in Survivor, we see the Garkon, the Tekon, and I found it very interesting that they have the same kind of like root species, like they're all Khan. So I found that interesting. And then we see that the missionaries. So we have these like three communities, these, you know, that do things differently. And then we have Alana, who is, you know, helping us understand, you know, because we see them through her eyes for the most part, helping us understand what to make of the different choices that these societies have made. So I found that interesting, the different communities interacting with each other. I found the meditation on addiction and withdrawal really interesting. And for all the, and for me, there was like a lot of irony around the missionaries, because they're so very deeply self-righteous. And I feel like she wrote the self-righteousness and the stubborn discrimination so well that they just ended up being like a parody of that for me. And I feel like Jules was a great example of that, yes, of that piousness. And for me, I loved that the colonizers just never won. Like, I love how much loss the missionaries suffered. Because like, if you look at how they were talking about this new world when Alana was a child and was going away with them, and how they talked about this destiny and what they'd be able to accomplish, it was just amazing to see them like end up not being able to be the powerful ones in control, the ones who knew everything. And I felt gratified by that, because I don't know a lot of stories where we get to see the disintegration or the like enslavement of the colonizers, and having, or the would-be colonizers, and having to actually get to explore what it means for a colonizing community to contend with their own subjugation, and that their own hubris is one cause of their subjugation, and that their doorway to freedom is a group of species that they will never believe are on par, let alone superior. And so like that flip was really fascinating. And then another theme that I found really compelling in the character of Alana was that she is an outsider everywhere, right? Like she doesn't fully belong anywhere. So she's kind of side-eyeing all of them in different ways. And of course she makes her choice at the end of the novel, but you know, there are parts in the novel where she's like, look, if I go with the tech on, I'm never going to see like a non-furry face for the rest of my life. Like we're done here. And yet still she makes the choice that she makes. And so I think about her as, you know, a Black girl, right? Recognizing that she has a number of different identities, but, you know, from the beginning of the novel, we see her being the butt of jokes. We see her being bullied. We see her being seen as less than, not the same as, worthy of violence, not worthy of protection and care, except for through her foster parents, who I don't think, and I guess is a question I'm curious for the group, like I don't think that her foster parents ever truly accepted her in all of her complexity, right? Like that there was always this low level, I think, undercurrent of rejection, even though they might have come to terms with certain decisions that she had made. So, you know, to see the story through the eyes of a character that didn't fully belong anywhere in her complexity as default, like that's very interesting. That's very interesting to me. And I think that her marginalization within the missionary community allowed her to be more compassionate, more open, perhaps, to, you know, her experiences with the tech on. So I found that really interesting. I had difficulty with the not even subtext, but the very obvious anti-indigenous, and I'm putting that in like quotes, but like in terms of like the con people, like all of the references to like natives and savages and things like that. I found that difficult, and it caused me to think about that as a reader. And so that's something that I've been thinking about. I found the violence toward women, the normalizing of beating, like all of that, very difficult to kind of just accept. And as I started to take it as a norm, it became like a bit challenging for me. And then I totally echo everything that Isa said about like the creation of this species, the colors and the change and the movement, like all of that I found really fascinating and super complex. And I haven't read the other short stories that are part of this world, so I'm happy about that, because until the con, I like the Oankali were like the most sort of complex creatures that she had created, and now we've got the con that I'm now seeing, like, you know, and I thought that was really brilliant. So yeah, lots of interesting themes, a lot of interesting pieces around like just belonging, a lot of interesting questions, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation in the breakout rooms. So those were my thoughts. And we've all now shared all of our thoughts. And I think I'm not sure if, oh, Iana, you are still with us. So what we usually do now is we break up into breakout groups. And since we have 60 people, 61 people here, I think it's a good idea for us to break up into groups. But wondering if, having heard the three of us provide feedback, wondering if there's anything you want to add before you take your leave, or before we move on to the next stage.
Sure. I have some tiny comments, and I don't want to give too much away, but I do want to say the ideas about addiction and detox and how not everyone will survive that, I feel like that's both literal, and that she did have some experience with knowing people who had addiction issues, and that's all I will say about that. I won't go into too much detail, but it seems that she has compassion for those folks, and she always is wondering what it's like to be inside some experience, even if she doesn't personally experience it. But a lot of the themes that you all picked up on, like needing to leave your father, there's a parables verse that says a tree cannot grow in its parent's shadows, basically. Um, that if it's cut off from light and oxygen and it can't grow in its own right, that it will wither and die, basically. And I feel that I love always hearing other people's commentary because everything that you observe is there, and it's so multifaceted. I don't feel that she really did subvert a lot of the Star Trek tropes that are just now being confronted in Discovery and in Picard, like talking about his arrogance, Picard's arrogance. So she's really ahead of her time. And she also hung out with people who did literally write for Star Trek and had their Star Trek pilots that she has in the archives. So I will leave now, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for having me. And also, there's merchandise in my shop that will be available at SistahSciFi before too long. And I'm probably going to make some like custom limited edition, like handmade, like books of the living or things that people can, have and hold. So people can look out for that. And I agree with everything that you all said. And I just want to have like tea with y'all and spend some time because this is inadequate. This is becoming inadequate for me. Although I love doing this work and I've been doing this kind of work since before COVID, like virtual meetings and stuff. It's so rich and so beautiful, the work that you're doing. So I just thank you for having me again. And I'm just sending you all my love from California. And, so glad that I've met you in person, Njeri and Isis, and I look forward to meeting Tatiana in person at some point. So I will take my leave. But again, if people have questions that they want to, collectively submit as a group, or I will look forward to watching this later, watching the rest of it later, because this has been really rich for me, and I just have loved every moment of it. So thank you.
Thank you as well, and have a wonderful rest of your Sunday, Ayana. Um, so our next step is we are going to be breaking into breakout groups now. So Sade, are you still able to do that? I think we're going to have 3 groups. Could you break us up into breakout groups, please? So for those of you who are new, what we are going to be doing now is we are going to be randomly placed into breakout groups. They're probably going to be, okay, there are 48 participants now, so it's a good number, about 15 or so per group. We should have about 40 minutes or so for all of us to discuss. So I'd encourage you to do that. For the people who are going to be in Tatiana's group, there's just a little change that we're going to do for you. Once you get into her breakout group, you're all going to go back into the main room, and have your breakout discussions in the main room. The reason why we're doing that is so that for the people who are participating on YouTube, so that they're not going to have 40 minutes of a blank screen. It means that they'll continue to be able to watch and participate using the chat. All right, Isis and Tati, is there anything that we should add before we start our group discussions?
I want to say, number one, if you are not comfortable, because my group will be on YouTube, please feel free, if you're not comfortable to have your face showing, to leave your camera off. I'm totally open to seeing your faces as we talk, but I want to make sure that you all are comfortable. There is someone who is in the room whose name that's showing on your screen is your phone number. So you may want to change that in case you are put into my breakout room, because we will be in grid view, and I would like for your phone number not to be broadcast on the internet. So just want to put that before we break out.
Okay, perfect. So Sade, can you put us into groups now?
Yeah, sounds good. And the person whose name is a phone number, they're not in Tatiana's group. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just open the rooms now.
All right, great. We are all here. Hello to everyone who is on YouTube. I do have the YouTube on my phone beside me, so if you would like to participate and contribute to the discussion in the chat, please do so. You're more than welcome to join us in that manner. I have spoken about this for yes, Josh. When you come back in, you'll be back in here. You're good. See you in a minute. I have spoken about this already a lot. So, would anyone like to share their overall thoughts on the book? I will ask while you are not speaking that you'll stay muted so that we are clearly hearing the person who is speaking. But if anyone would like to share their thoughts, please do so. Don't everybody speak at once. I do have some questions I can ask. All right. While you're thinking about that, I will ask a question. It's no secret my distaste for Doro. And in reading this, I initially likened Natak to Doro just because of how he interacted with the humans. But in this kind of situation, where you have someone who is coming in and basically invading your space, is Natak a Doro like figure in taking advantage of the ignorance of the humans? Do you feel that he was like Doro?
I thought both Natak and to a certain extent Dyut, both of them had Doro-like uh, behaviors.
Okay. Anyone else?
I remember wondering when the first time someone mentioned Joro as an analogy to someone else's behavior in the current story. I remember wondering, what? I never saw that, and I kept looking for where's Doro? Because what I saw in all the people who were their most noxious selves was always some kind of compassion for something or someone. And I never got that in Doro. So I never saw the Doro in them versus them and Doro, whichever it is. And yet it struck me when I first heard that in the dialogue. I think it was one of the earlier sessions when we were preparing for this, that came up, and I didn't make the association then, and I still don't. So somebody help me.
Well, I think I'm the one who mentioned it because of how Natak related to the humans. I didn't find compassion in Natak because I felt that Natak approached the humans in a very calculating manner, and in how the way that he basically was forced into making the decision essentially because they weren't going anywhere. It was a one-way trip to a whole other planet. That we're going to use these humans in the way in which I can, and I'm going to keep it a secret from them. But then when they called him on it, when they asked him about it, made the statement, he was completely open in, stating like how the missionaries thought the Tekon had raided multiple times, and come to find out they only raided the one time when they took Alana and the other missionaries. All of the other raids were the Gekon, and he owned up to it and admitted it, and did so with no fucks given. Like, that was very Doro to me.
It wasn't. It was the absence of compassion towards anything or anyone that I was referring to as thinking of Doro-like, and I didn't see, as you've observed, any expressions of compassion toward the missionaries. But so what? They're invaders. They shouldn't be getting a whole lot of compassion. So, but the Natak, is that his name?
Yeah.
Natak was compassionate toward those of his own kind in his own way. And they had their ways, and they experienced one another in ways that were community-minded. What the hell? I never got that quality from Doro's isolationist tendencies.
As soon as you made the distinction, I knew where you were going, and you're correct. You're correct. I was viewing that from the side of a human. You are very correct in his compassion and care for his own people. We have some comments in the chat. And Anne said, in terms of enslaving people, I can see a parallel to Doro. And Lois said he didn't have the power Doro had, but seemed to struggle with wanting the power Dude had. And yes, absolutely. That is another thing to discuss and question, the respect of the blue. Now, I personally love that because blue is my favorite color. So I probably would have gone to this planet and Dayut could have gotten it very easily without demanding, because blue is my favorite color. But the differences and the conflict between the Garkon and the Tekon, but even with those conflicts and the Garkon's their distaste of each other, just for their different lifestyles, there's a level of respect that the Garkon had and could not give to Dayut when he came in, because of his color, because of his station. He's the Tekon How. The Gekon don't have a How. Why don't they have a How? Because they're the people that they had were born inferiorly for the hierarchy of their civilization. So the power struggle of wanting to have as much power as Dayut and not having it, but being able to exact some of that power over these missionaries was very interesting. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to share? Please. Josh, you're smiling.
Well, I mean, I do like to talk about it, but I also only halfway to the book, unfortunately, because I've had such a hard month when it comes to reading. But generally speaking, my thoughts so far is, I think, largely reflected by what a lot of people have said here and in the intro. One of the big thoughts I had was how kind of disappointed I was when it came to the science, which I think was spoken on early on. And I guess that's part of why Octavia Butler was kind of concerned with the book. But one thing that I think was also acknowledged was how it's still a culturally rich world, even if the science is a little premature. And I think there's still a lot to love from that perspective. And I am looking forward to finishing the book with all this extra commentary to think about. One thing I didn't think about, and I kind of hate myself for it, was how, I think it's already been said here, these colonizers, missionaries, are the colonizers. They're just having done to them what they wanted to do to them. And I really shouldn't have as much sympathy for them as I was sort of having at first. And I think that'll be an interesting change of perspective as I finish the book. There's pretty much all my thoughts so far, though.
100%. Thank you. for sharing. That's another thing that I wanted to mention or speak on as well, and offer opportunity for others to share your reading experience. This was a very short novel. It's under 200 pages, but it felt very long. And I think I struggled more and found myself. One thing that I love about reading on my Kindle is that it pushes me along when I'm reading the book, because I don't know when the chapter ends. I was looking for the end of chapter 5. Like, chapter 5 is so long. And how did any, I think that also had something to do, like, just the pace of the novel. There were some other comments that were made during Njeri's slow reading sessions about not being able to or being able to keep track of who was speaking when. I think that's also some of the things that fed into Butler's decision to strike this from the record as much as she could. Would anyone like to share your reading experience with this book?
This is the only book so far that we've read in the group that I think I will have to reread in order to get a full understanding of the three main communities, because it was very confusing at the beginning. The second half to me, by the time I got to the second half, I understood what was going on. But the first one, just today, I had to go back and read about Tien, because when I first read about it, and I was like, oh, I don't remember this. To get to the point where to the end of the book when they refer to Tien, and it's like, okay, what happened? But that's where I am. It was a very for me, my word for this book was confused. I was confused.
Anyone else? Thank you, Geraldine, for sharing. Anyone else?
It seemed to me like one of the reasons probably why the book seems so long to several of us is because the quality of the storyline was so densely heavy and oppressive and escapist needing and painful, essentially, that there was not a whole lot of joy happening up in there. I don't recall any really, frankly. So that has a lot to do with our experience of reading it, and that's the way it was. We get that. So this is how I think, for me anyway, that would be part of my feeling of how it's drawn out, is because there's just almost unrelentingly, that is what's going on. This is this string of stuff that's like, okay, so right, right, okay, yeah, when's it going to be over? Well, yeah, and like you, Geraldine, I felt the same way. There were places where I was lost and confused, and I had to start back over and go back and reread. And when I got to the end, it's like, is that the end? And I had to go back to the beginning and say, well, no, right. So yeah, that was definitely, the confusion factor was real. It was real time too. So I'm with you on that.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes, Lois. I was gonna say I saw that you unmuted, but I didn't want to call you out. So yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I found for this one, I really had to take notes and almost make charts of the three different communities, between, the names being not names that I'm used to, or just trying to sort of figure out who was in which of the camps and what their relationships were with each other. And I also had to go back and reread a couple of the sections just to say, oh wait, this person, I sort of started taking the notes early, about maybe a third of the way through, and then had to go back and read some of the first parts again to figure out where people fit in.
Anyone else? While we wait for others, if you would like to chime in, I would like to say Alicia in the YouTube chat has also shared that she was confused by the book and is taking in everyone else's view on the book. So the discussion where you weren't the only one who was confused. And we all, have found ways to look at and go back. And I had to go back and remind myself of who Tien was at the point when, because she's only mentioned twice. So at the point when she's mentioned again, like she's mentioned at the very beginning of the story, and then we get a description of her at the very end of the story. And so I had to remind myself of who she was. And then there's a whole nother thought on how Alana is able to pick up and go and continue to do what she needs to do after just losing her child. And in the Zoom chat has shared that she was thinking about Octavia writing this before 1978 and wondering about how she saw a similarity to the ideas of not just Star Trek, but maybe Planet of the Apes. I just looked up dates on Planet of the Apes movie and it came out in 68 and the TV show was in 74, wondering if there was any influence. So if so, I think her take on it was way more interesting and nuanced. That's very interesting. I have not watched the original Planet of the Apes movies. I only watched a couple of the reboots, and then I was freaked out, so I did not watch the last one. Geraldine shared that she wonders if her expectation or reading experience was affected by the knowledge of Butler's decision to pull this book from publication. I think that's the case for a lot of us. I think a lot of us came into reading this in expecting, and Jerry mentioned it in one of her slowies, like waiting for the telltale moment or the sign where we would see in the book, this is why. Like, this is why she didn't want this reprinted. This is why she wanted to leave it as it was. And making the call to pull it. I have also thought about a lot in reading it and just thinking about Survivor overall. If you all have read Bernice McFadden, another amazing Black author, she reprinted, rewrote, and made some edits to one of her books. The first was called My Name is Butterfly, and the re-edited one that she did was called Praise Song for the Butterflies. And I have often thought if, Octavia lived, and had the time to dedicate and devote to that, if she would have made the decision to rewrite it, retool it for republication. And then like I would still want the original. But then to also have her edited copy that would have been something that she did out of the desire to redo it outside instead of the need for the funds to move it along. Any other thoughts that you would like to share? I totally lost my train of thought as far as what question was being asked. Any other thoughts that you all would like to share, bring forth, share?
As far as just my experience reading it, part of the reason it's taken a while is because of the way it's published. It's already obviously not quite as honed as her other books. It's hard to get through for the many of the reasons already been said. But the other thing is that I'm generally an audio reader, so it's how I approach books more easily, and it helps especially with voices. And it makes it a lot harder with so many different characters and not having that voices. And Kindle has been helpful because I've been able to make use of the text-to-speech feature, but still not as good as the professional narration. On the flip side, though, is it's forced me to do a hybrid reading, which means I'm taking more notes than I traditionally do. I'm still reading it, so I've made a lot of use of it, but it's at least making me think about specific passages if it stands out or not, which is a unique experience. But I've also seen that it's confusing. And going back to your last comment, don't forget what it was. I know this. So what if she had rewritten it? That makes me think about a bigger question. I think goes beyond this book, which is how we would be seeing Octavia Butler today if she was alive, and how her death ended up impacting, I guess, how who read her and their approach and what they thought about her when they approached it and what they thought about it when they left it. And I think all that matters on how we judge a book and how prolific it is an experience. Knowing that it's so rare that she is gone, I think also influences just how we think about her.
Oh, Josh. Yeah. That's a, you've done this twice. You're on punishment. That is a very good point. Because how would this be as precious an experience to us? It's a very precious experience to me. Would this be as precious of an experience to me if Butler were still alive? Would this be a book that I would feel open having this kind of conversation about? And that's sharing our confusion, sharing what we, did particularly didn't like about the story or about some of the characters. Would we be this open to having this conversation on the internet?
Yeah.
If if Butler were still alive and cared more for this novel than than we know she did in the end all be all. That is a very good. Thanks a lot. I would like to ask, and because I kind of wrote my own version of Njeri's question that she posed before we broke out, which was, "What would you be willing to sacrifice for emancipation?" One of the things that I found very interesting about Jules's character is that he's someone, Jules and Neela, they are two people who have escaped, been set free from the forced community that we saw being built in Mind of My Mind. And in getting out of that community, then having to deal with the plague and the clay arcs and all of their piety, which is a whole nother discussion that I would really love to have with people who have a faith base that I have and have read this book, because I think there's a lot of eye-opening things that could be seen by other people who are Christians and who see this book and see all of the piousness that happens. But he really Jules takes on the mantle and the charge of freeing the missionaries from the danger of the people in the Forsyth community, because obviously, as all of these years have passed, Forsyth is growing. And the influence of people within the Forsyth community to reach other people in the world is growing. We saw that happening in Mind of My Mind. But also getting out of the realm of reach of the plague. And he's brought his missionaries into this completely different planet and just into a different type of captivity, because you were captive under Forsyth, you were captive under the plague, and now you're captive under the Tacon. And there's different ways of emancipation and different types of emancipation that he has. And then we get to the end of the book and they're free to an extent, because what we know about leaders is when you get rid of one, another one comes up, so how long until the next Garcon leader comes up who has mindsets like Natak? We only meet Natak. We don't meet his kids. We know that he's been reproducing. We know that they have hybrid children. We don't meet his kids. So the legacy of this conflict between the missionaries and the Garcon continues. So the question becomes and is, what, in order to obtain emancipation, and then what does emancipation look like to you when you're dealing with situations that are essentially out of your control? What does emancipation from the dangers of COVID look like to you, even with the vaccine, and dealing with people who are anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers? Not speaking to that like specifically, but we are dealing with some type of situation with that. What is a good price for emancipation?
There's something weird about that question, though, Tati, because emancipation at its core is freedom, and freedom from, or freedom to be, or freedom with, how, what. Free to be who and how you are as you manifest in the world that you inhabit in a way that brings you joy. I mean, if you're under the control of someone else or something else, you are less free. So emancipation is space to self-express. And if that's available wherever you are, then that's emancipated enough. If it's not available, then what's worth, I guess it's to me, it's like, you can't really, it's almost like you can't have it both ways. If freedom is the ability to do and be who and how you are, however you are, and you choose to compromise or to accept other people's unwillingness or willingness to let you be who you are, how you are, well, you can accommodate to that or you can join them. Those are the choices, basically. So what is freedom? Is it free for me to choose to be with and who and however I choose to be, or is it free to do whatever works for everybody else?
Okay, I like that. And let's take that and look at Alana. Because I think she is more free with, in my opinion, and feel free to disagree. I feel like she's more free with the Tekon than she is with the missionary.
I was thinking about that, and I wonder, as I read it, the Tekon's ability to emote through their color, through the color system. I mean, to a certain extent, Alana knows where she stands by virtue of how they are and Diut, versus her foster parents, who are not only enslaved, literally, and also through the, I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it Meklot, the addiction?
That's how I've been pronouncing it.
And they're the most human, and she's what they term the wild beast or wild human, and she already knows that type of person, for lack of a better word, that type of human. And she decides to go instead with a different type of community where she believes that she can be most herself because she's already experienced that side, even as a wild human. And the missionaries are not that far off from what she knew. At least that's how I see it.
Plus, you can't unknow what you know. Once she's learned what she knows about them, how's she gonna forget that?
Right.
So going with the missionaries would be denying what she's already knows to be true. So,
and it would be another way of, because I feel like she's able to be more of herself in this adjusted situation, because having left Earth and coming to this, this new planet, there are things about Alana that inevitably have to change because she has to become accustomed and acclimate to living in this new environment. I think she had more freedom to do that as Alana and decide what she wanted to take in, because I didn't think that the Tekon were going to get rid of her if she made the decision that she wasn't going to be this fighting human, trying to continue her existence and be a part of this community. If she wanted to be more of an artisan, a non-fighter, they would not have, gotten rid of her, versus how easily the missionaries casted her off after years of being, of her being with them. I think I wrote down that she was 7 or 8 when they got her, and then when they leave Earth, she's 17, and at the point when we get to this happening, she's in her 20s. So she's been with them for a decade, and they easily casted her aside for making her own decisions and being true to herself. Yes, Dr. VP.
I hadn't counted the numbers, so yeah, she wasn't that old yet in my mind. She was still older teenager kind of gal, but assuming your numbers are right, which I'm sure they are, being a numbers gal. The idea that she was 8 when they found her, and she was what, 15 when they
17.
17
17
when
when they left Earth.
Okay.
And then they had been on that planet for about 3 or 4 years. So she's within.
Uh-huh.
She's 20 plus.
Prime breeding age. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But they don't even see it like that. Like the Tekon don't see it like that. Not that I understood it as I was reading it. That, they don't, because they don't know anything about human physiology. They,
Wait a minute now. That don't compute. I'm sorry. That don't compute with what I read.
Well, okay, share.
Well, I mean, without referring to the words, I'm getting that the anatomical differences were not an issue.
That's not an issue, right? But we don't know at what age, because it's not explored in the story. We don't know at what age the Tekon start their mating, and we don't know what makes what marks maturity, physical maturity in a female Tekon. So that's more what I was going with, us not knowing that. And yes, anatomy matches. That's the whole Star Trek thing. Kirk goes to every planet and every badge is in the same spot. But we don't know that information. I think that goes along the lines of like the research and things or thoughts behind these two different species that Octavia may have wanted to explore more.
Well, we know that, at least from the missionaries' perspective, the Tekon and the Garkon, but probably the Khan in general, that's another issue to talk about at some point. But we know that they are what the missionaries would consider promiscuous in their sexual encounters with one another. That when they felt that they did it, essentially. We get that message from different angles about how
they just did it everywhere. That was the other thing. Like they just did it everywhere. Like,
whatever. Like
it wasn't until they heard from the missionaries that you can't just drop trowel and get at it in the middle of us. That's not acceptable. Then they changed how they do that. It was like, okay, well, we'll go over into the woods so that y'all can. Yeah.
And then there was the fertility issue. Apparently,
yes, I was going to ask about that next, or make a comment about that next.
So if you're not having lots of offspring through your liaisons, then you would have to have more liaisons so that you could have offspring. I mean, so to choose to have liaisons with only one person and then replicate offspring over and over with them. Well, we know that what happened with Jules and Amelia. They had 3 and they died. They died. Well, if the purpose, and in the missionaries, the purpose of those kinds of encounters is procreation. That is to make man like the image of God, I think, is something like that, to recreate in the image of God. That's the purpose of those kinds of encounters. That's not the purpose of those kinds of encounters with the Khan people. For them, it was the one instance of pleasure that I could see anyone being acknowledged for having. There was the one place where there was a comment that looked like, oh yeah, there's some pleasure here. There's some joy, and it's subtle, but it's there. And it was about sensual pleasure. So they're doing that. And the missionaries are
not doing that. They're not. No, they have no babies. The missionaries have had no babies while they have been living on this planet. And there's even a comment that is made, and it's a very brief section in the novel where Neela, Jules, and someone else notices the male missionary teens looking wantonly at the female Garcon, and the response of Jules to that as leader and saying, you know, well, no, we're not going to say anything if it's our end that does something. But if they approach our people, then we'll say something. But if our people, you know, we'll handle it to the side with them. We won't make a huge statement about it. And then finding out like that again, the ways that they continuously lose was just, I think I enjoyed that more than I was supposed to. When Njeri said that, I was like, yes, that was great. Like to find out that you left Earth to protect the sanctity of humanity, which is an oxymoron in itself. And here's this other, you know, species of alien who's cohabitating and liaisoning with kidnapped humans. And guess what? They got babies. And their babies are furry and they're different colors. Like they're not all white. I find it very interesting that of the colors, and I don't know why this, like funny things stick out to me when I read books, that Alana and Dude have a green daughter. And then it's, you know, the expectation that daughter, like this black woman and this blue alien had a green daughter, a green furry daughter with lips that look like Alana's lips, eyes that look like Alana's eyes. She's probably would have had human hands. And to see the difference in how she's accepted, like they're so excited that Dude has had a baby after years of perceived infertility on his side. The Tekon are so excited that he's had a baby that there's this huge, like, everlasting party that goes on from the point of Alana announcing or them announcing that she's pregnant. And the total disdain on the side of the humans in hearing about this crossbred, cross species child that existed, even knowing that the child was like, y'all killed her. Y'all killed her. She's gone. Y'all still mad.
Because life is not life.
Right.
One life is not.
And not life like you expected it to be.
Y'all ain't.
Yep. Anyone else would like to share any thoughts?
Yes, Tatiana, Dion.
Yes, ma'am. Hi.
I didn't read the book, but I've been reading Octavia's books forever, and I met her. And in reference to what Josh was saying, and meeting Octavia many times over the many years when she was alive, she would have loved this conversation, because this is what she wants you to do. She wants you to break her book down, analyze it, regurgitate it, throw it out, turn it upside down, make it jambalaya, because she wants you to use your creativity. And that's what she's about. And that's what makes us good readers, critical readers. And if we can talk about this book, imagine what we can do with other books, which we have done. No matter what color, no matter what race, no matter what religion, that's what the arts is about. That's what an author wants. And that's the beauty. And listening to you guys talk about this book, it's like, whoa, volcanoes, everything is exploding. It's like, oh my God. This is incredible, guys. Thumbs up.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you so much. It is definitely Njeri's passion project. It was her idea, and knowing that I was obsessed with Octavia, am obsessed with Octavia Butler, she asked me to participate, and I have been greatly fed by the conversations that we have around this. So thank you so much for sharing that, because that means that I know that means a lot to all of us, but speaking for me, that means a lot to me. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. Where's my brain going? I had another thought, and I would like for us to take a moment, because when I finished this book, and I think Dr. VP, you made the comment that, we got to the end, it was like, oh wait, that's the end. And I was so, didn't expect it to be, I just knew my Kindle was wrong. Like the more I was reading, the closer I got to the end, the percentage kept going down. It was like every time I turned the page, the percentage number would go down 1%. I'm like, no, this can't be happening. And then that 100 hit, and I was like, this is it. where are we going from here? So I have like legit a list. I have a list of questions that I wrote out. Like, what is the after of this? Because I know whatever happens in Pattern Master, we're not getting more Alana and Dayut. Like we're done with Alana and Dayut. Because that's how Butler wrote. So what questions, and I don't mind sharing mine at all, but what questions for those of you who got to the end, I know a couple of you have not, and that's fine. Oh gosh, and we're done. That's the end. We're being rejoined. We're being rejoined. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the main room. I was just posing a question that we did not get to. I didn't even get to finish before you all came in. I will share with you all. We may not be able to discuss it as a group, but I would like for you to think about it because this is what I have done at the end of Survivor. We got to that 100%, and knowing that the next book, we're not going to get Alana and Dayut. I had a whole bunch of questions, and I wrote down my list of questions as they are just now. As I said, I'm still writing and thinking about this thing. And so I was going to ask people to share the questions that they had about the missionaries or about Alana and Dayut after the 100% mark in our Kindle. If you wanted to do so. If you want to put your questions in the chat, I think it would be nice for all of us to see. My main question that I had or have at this moment is, where did the missionaries go? Because the idea was that they were going to separate themselves from the Garcon and from the Mekla eventually, but also not be under the umbrella of the Tekon. They need to be in their own area where they can live. So where did they go? What did that place look like? And then, do Dayut and Alana have another kid? Because one thing that we got from this was, as short as their liaison was supposed to be, Dayut likes Alana and Alana likes Dayut. So they're staying together for however long they want to. But if you have, I don't want to take up a whole bunch of space because I know we have next things to happen in the discussion. But yeah, if you have questions, I encourage you to write those down if you want to share them in the chat with the group so that we can all think about those. Okay.
So can we, before we go into the large group discussion while people are thinking about what they want to say, I'm wondering if we could just switch things up and just do our selfie now so that we don't lose momentum going through. So if you have something related to Survivor that you can put beside your face and you'd like to take a photo, please put it up and we will take the photo now. I'm just gonna prep my okay. I know people are still, I'm gonna get mine too. All right. Okay, so I'm gonna take the picture. Are we good? Oops. Oh, okay. Awesome. Oh, somebody needs a sec to turn on the device. Go ahead. Where are you, Maria? I can't see. Oh, there you are. Okay. Yes, you're pulling it up on your phone. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. No pressure. No, not everybody's looking at you. It's okay. We're good. Oh, you good? Okay. So, oh, Kabir does. We're taking our selfie, Kabir does. So if you want to hold it up beside your face, that'd be great. Okay, ready? 1, 2, and 3. And then Kabir does. I know, you got to get, are you going to get your thing up? Okay. So we're going to do one more and then we will. Okay, you turned your screen off, so I think that's a no, which is cool. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so Tatiana, do you wanna take the lead on starting with the large group discussion since you had some questions that that you were asking the large group?
Sure. Hold on. Well, let's go. Am I unmuted? I am. Okay, let's go with the question that I had, I shared my two questions, or two of my questions. So if anyone would like to share what questions you had, I told Njeri before we started that the way that the book ended to me really felt like the, Alana and Dayu walking into the sunset, fading away into the sunset as, the novel comes to an end. And there are so many open questions that can be asked, and we won't get answers from them. But if you had, questions that you would like to see, it's Latrice made a comment earlier about me doing a fan fiction for Clay. Like this, there are so many opportunities for OEB fan fiction because of how she writes her stories. I've been thinking about that since you put that in the chat, Latrice. Thanks a lot. But yeah, any questions that you all would like to share just to give to the group? Lois shared in the chat that she wondered if the missionaries survived. Although they were addicted by the Gakhan, they also were brought food and were somewhat taken care of by them. So, okay, so that's because they have not maintained their own resources in living on this planet. Hi, Catherine. Thank you for joining. Would anyone else like to share a question that they have?
So I know people are adding their questions in the chat, and I want to acknowledge also time. We are over what we usually do. So if you have to leave, it's cool to say bye in the chat. And so thank you for participating. And we will be wrapping up fairly short soon. So just to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Maria shared in the chat that it was said that she would never see the missionaries again. But she didn't see why she didn't see why she couldn't travel to the north someday to see how they were doing. And that's a very good point. One of the things that we shared or talked about briefly in our breakout room was how easily the missionaries, Lisa, how easily the missionaries casted casted Alana off after finding out that she'd had, not that she like slept with Dayut, but that she'd had a child with Dayut, how easily they were able to cast her off. And that question, like, would they even be willing to allow her to know where they were? Like, how much searching would she have to do to try and find them? Because one of the other things that we discussed was that they had not reproduced in the time. They had not reproduced among humans, among themselves, in the time that they had been on this planet. So, like, the expectation for growth, if they left this 20, are they gonna, in 2 or 3 years, are they gonna be 40? Because they hadn't had their kids. What's up with that? Like, that's a question. Why haven't they had any kids? They're not participating in acts that would bring about children. Yeah, that's true. Dayut even said that he would send a couple of hunters to teach them so they know where they land. Yeah, that is true. But still also being like hands off. I want to know what happened. Like, where did they end up? How did they make their lives happen after? How easily, what other people did they come in contact with, or aliens that they come in contact with while they're on this planet? How did the relationship between the missionaries and the Garcon change now that Natak is no longer a factor? They who, Latrice? Latrice asked if they say something about their kids coming from the sky or something, or am I making that up? They, the missionaries?
I think the Hoa children come from the sky.
I think that was more along the lines of, you don't have to be a blood relation. Like it's not dealing like with a monarchy where in order for you to be king or queen, you have to be a descendant of in the line of the king or queen. You could challenge someone just like Gail for the Garcon would have eventually challenged Natak to take his mantle as leader for her to be the leader of the Garcon. I think it's the same way with the Tekon. You have the opportunity to either challenge or face tests to become the How. Because I cannot remember the name of the Tekon How before Dayut. But she and Dayut had a very good relationship. She and Dayut had a sexual relationship before Dayut became How. So you don't have to kill in order to succeed and be the How. Not succeed. Ascend. Whatever. Words. English. Difficult. And become the How for the Tekon. But you do for the Garcon, there's murder that has to take place for the next leader to come into being. So that's what I think they meant by from the sky.
Yeah, but I think with the Garcon, the reason why is, I guess they had killed all their judges, and to create a How, you have to at least have a judge class. For like hunters, for some reason can't conceive a How. And I guess so amongst the hunters, the leader will always come through some kind of battle, right? But I guess with the How, like they can glow blue and be like, I don't know, I'm a How yet, from my understanding, which is probably
thank you for that. Also, how did because the Garcon don't have a How, like they don't even with Natak having the position that he was not referred to as the How. He was referred to as the head hunter. So how did they lose that? The Tekon How sometimes comes from the air, which I took to mean an unexpected How blue showing in a child, like blue eyes being a recessive gene. That's a good. We're gonna have to read this again. Maria, thanks.
So can we move to Isis, your group? Was there anything that only if there's something that you wanted to share from your group discussions?
Yeah, so my group, we discussed a lot of things. There was some debate as to whether there are parallels between Survivor and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I haven't watched it, so I did not have an opinion, but I thought it was...
Watch it.
Yes, I know, I should watch it, I guess. But yeah, and so I did Survivor potentially influence some of the plot in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That was super interesting to me. We talked about the relationship between Alana and Jorit, which I'm probably mispronouncing that name. And some people were a fan, some people were not a fan of that dynamic. And yeah, if anybody in my group wants to add something I missed, because I feel like I missed a lot, feel free. But it was a fun discussion. I enjoyed it.
Okay. I'll stop saying Hoa. So it's all good. Thank you, Isis. So I'm not going to recap for our group. We had some really good discussion, but I do want to ask Will B to share your say. Or do you not want to share that? I can ask the question, just put it out there if you want on your behalf, but you would prefer that. Okay. So one of the things that Will said in our discussion that I found really really interesting was that for the missionaries, Alana was the mission, like she was a mission. And when Wilby said that, like you could see folks being like, what is that? Like, oh my God, right? And so I just wanted to kind of share that, because I think that it definitely connects to the question of like belonging, and then the larger, like the meta question of what did Alana actually survive? Like what what are the different dimensions her survival took along the way. And in some cases, she survived the missionaries' framing of her as a mission. And so I thought that was a really okay, cool. Got your point. So that was a really powerful point that will be mentioned. So thank you for that. I asked our group members if anybody wanted to share anything in the large group, and no one said yes. So I'm going to take that as that's our recap. And now if we can go to the next stage, which is our sound circle. And Sade, we don't need to use the PowerPoint just in terms of time right now. So I think, Tati, are you good with explaining how we're going to do the sound circle for people who are new? And maybe we can limit it to 10 minutes so that we can try to wrap up by 1:45.
Okay, absolutely. For those of you who are new, the way that the sound circle works is if you have found or highlighted a section, a brief passage in the story that you would like to share and read. You don't have to give any explanation. There is no explanation. It is just random reading to share a part or a piece of the story that spoke out to you or pulled you your attention. And we are all silent while you read. And once you finish, the next person, if they would like to do so, it will go on like that until we have a break that sounds like we're done.
Are we starting that now?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. We're starting now. I'm currently looking for the section that, that I want to read.
Okay, I'm gonna start. Only Alana's memory of Nathan's loss and of his importance to the colony kept her from exploding at him. The returnee is not accepted at once, she continued. He's unclean. No one speaks aloud to him. No one touches him. The only communication with him is through a code of brightening and darkening coloring. Light signals, they call it, because some of the time they're using their natural luminescence. The returnee goes to the home of the first member of his clan, and his first clansman escorts him to one of the prison rooms. Then, no matter what time of the day or night it is, the first clansman summons the returnee's family, his friends, and youth. With this group, he returns to the prison room, and the group forms a circle around the returnee. They're all seated on the floor, one by one. Each person in the circle goes before the returnee to give him some personal message of encouragement in the code. That his wife or mate awaits him, that he has proven his fighting strength by breaking free of the Garkon, that as he has survived some other difficult struggle, he can survive withdrawal, whatever.
They named the world Canaan and prayed that it would live up to its name. The long yellow-green valley in which they had landed was like an answer to their prayer. It was on the equator, but high above the level of the local seas. Plateau land stretched between the two ranges of mountains. It was well watered by rivers that flowed down from the mountains, and the ship's doctor pronounced the water safe. The weather was warm and mild, and the land apparently fertile.
Do you know the meaning of the hand to throat gesture? It's a caress. Naila sounded harassed. It's one of the things they do instead of kissing. It's that, yes, but it began as an expression of trust. You don't let anyone that close to your neck unless you trust him. The words that went with the gesture were, I hold your life and do not take it.
Are you really one of them, Lana? Can you really accept them as your people, even now that you've gotten used to the way the way they look? Yes, said Alana. I don't understand, she said. She shook her head again. After all we tried to teach you, and you're bright. You learned so much. You accepted God and the mission. I accepted you and Jules. You used to know that. But you saved my life. I was grateful, and in time I came to love you. But you know I was never a true missionary. What else can you be? You're here on an alien world among creatures of another species. I'm a wild human, said Alana quietly. That's what I've always been. She glanced at Jules. I haven't lost myself, not to anyone. And again to Neela, in time, I'll also be a Tekon judge. I want to be. And I'm Dude's wife and your daughter, if you can still accept me as your daughter.
I did not like the way she had looked at me. There had been more than fear in her eyes. There was something of the horror that I had seen in the eyes of a friend when he saw for the first time a loathsome, poisonous desert animal. My differences repelled her. Her differences interested me. She was ugly almost beyond description, and yet her appearance was as natural to her as mine was to me. She wore it with assurance that was unmistakable, clearly secure in her private belief that we were the ones malformed and ugly. I, in particular, did not meet her standards.
Alana ignored him, spoke to Jules. It's not only the message that the circle gives, but the light signals themselves, the steady rhythmic flickering, and the circle sways as though to music. I talked my way into one of the ceremonies so I could watch. Then I sat there bored, watching, feeling superior. She glanced at Nathan, but after a while it started to get to me. I hadn't learned to read the light signals yet. I did later, but after a while I couldn't keep my eyes open. I might have collapsed right along with the prisoner if I hadn't started to look away.
Finally, the missionaries of Verret Colony. With the missionaries of Verret Colony, she prepared to leave Earth. There would be no returning. The mission ship would take the colonists and their supplies to a habitable new world. Then it would die. It would become nothing more than a carcass to be cannibalized. The ship's builders were taking no chances. On Earth's first starship, only Earth's first starship, the Clay's Ark, had been allowed to return after its voyage. With it had come the Clayoc microorganism, secure inside the bodies of the surviving members of the crew. The men and women of the crew, driven by a disease induced need to spread their affliction, evaded their mandatory quarantine and examination. They escaped easily since no one had expected them to try to escape. Then they disappeared into the general population and gleefully began spreading a worldwide epidemic. The Clayark plague had killed over half the population. It was still killing and still causing the distinctive Clayark mutation in the young of its surviving victims.
Diut reached out and took a mekla fruit from the bowl. He held it before him, between them. And what of the Garkon? What if we two sit here and decide not to fight each other again? How would you stop Natak when he next decides to use your people? As he spoke, he replaced the fruit in its bowl. During the instant that the bowl completely hid his hand from Jules, that hand was the same brown as Alana's own skin. Alana understood the sign, realized that he knew of her re-addiction. And did he condemn her, she wondered? She found herself examining his coloring for any trace of yellow disapproval. She found none. Perhaps he felt none, but he could hide his feelings when he wanted to.
And I held on to Alana. There was still much for me to teach her, and she was teaching me the language of her people. I knew I'd have to deal with them someday. She was learning not only to fight, but to read the light speech that we used to signal each other through the mountains. We signaled warnings of raiders, of dangerous animals, or good hunting, of places along the slopes that were not safe, and of other things. Light speech was difficult for Alana to learn, especially at first, but her life would be safer when she understood it. As the snows came and we were inside more, I spent much time teaching her. It was a pleasurable thing to do. Too much that had to do with her had become pleasurable. I realized that I was becoming too attached to her, and she to me. I promised myself I would let her go soon.
You dry up, said Alana. You lose water in every way you can, and drinking doesn't do any good because you can't keep anything down until it's over or until you get more mekla. When you feel first, though, before the thirst, is hunger. What you feel first, though, before the thirst, is hunger, craving. She let herself remember for a moment. I know what it's like to starve. Back on Earth before I came to the colony, I got hungry enough to eat some things you'd probably think were pretty disgusting, but I think coming off the mekla is about the worst kind of hunger I've known. She shuddered more with apprehension than from remembering, but it's the water loss that kills.
Okay. Thank you everyone for participating in the sound circle. Sade, if you can put up the slideshow again. Thank you. At some point, you're going to get a survey. We are reformatting it so that it gets out to you quicker. So please do complete it when you have an opportunity to do so. I don't know whose one this is, but do you want to, Isis, do you want to talk about the next book?
Yes, gladly. So our next book is Pattern Master. It's the last book in the Patternist series. The combined mind force of a telepathic race, Patternists, thoughts can destroy, heal, and rule. For the strongest minds commands the entire pattern and all within. And now the son of the Pattern Master craves this ultimate power. He has murdered or enslaved every threat to his ambition, except one. In this wild, mutant-infested hills, a young apprentice must be hunted down and destroyed because he is the tyrant's equal and the pattern master's other son. So that is next book. Fun fact, I learned that Octavia Butler was not excited about the name Pattern Master, and I think initially wanted to call it Reign of the Mind. And the publisher was like, we're going to go with Pattern Master. So that's all I got.
Thank you. So I'm going to be doing, another slow read for Pattern Master. This time it's going to be only 3 sessions, July 16th, 23rd, and 24th. So if you're interested in participating, just look out on Onyx Pages, and we'll likely send an email with the links, and that is a way that you can read together with a small group of us before the live show on the 25th.
I would also like to add, and Jerry, I know we have some people who have joined us, and this is your first time joining. The previous live reading sessions that Njeri has done are also on her channel, Onyx Pages. If you would like to read the other books at whatever time, if you're just joining us or if you're watching this in the future, if you want to read the other books that we've read prior to Survivor, prior to Pattern Master, and you want to feel like you're reading them with a group of people, those videos are still there, and there are reading sprints as well as discussions, and the comments sections for those videos are open if you would like to comment as well.
Thank you. So
also, you can, I just saw my name. Also, you can buy your books and merchandise from SistahSciFi. There are currently, Isis, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 OEB shirts available. The Mind of My Mind shirt that you see here, as well as one of the covers for the most recent cover, I think, for Parable of the Sower, that are available on her website, as well as all of the books that we have read and the books that we are going to be reading. There's the bind up, which is called Seed to Harvest, which is available. And then you also have the individual copies that are being re-released, correct? That are available on the website as well. So I currently have the bind up. I will be purchasing myself the individual copies of the books because I have desecrated this by writing in it. Boo, Hush and Jerry. So yes, do that.
And of course, SistahSciFi is your source for all sorts of Black science fiction and fantasy. And if there's a book that you want to read that isn't on the website, you can always just email Isis. So please do so. Okay, we can go to the next one. So we are quite beyond our time, and I am not able to stay afterwards for an informal chat. I just want to check with you, Tatiana and Isis. Do either of you have time in your schedules to do that today? Because we might skip it if not.
Unfortunately, I do not. I didn't know that we were going to go this long, and I do have an obligation.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Wait, let's do it next time. My excuse is that I'm really hungry. It's lunchtime.
Valid.
And okay. I do also want to state that, like, the lounge will not be open, but our social media platforms are. We have the OEB Slow Read, Octavia E. Butler Slow Read Twitter account, as well as the Instagram account, and there are posts there, and you can make posts on Twitter and tag the Slow Read account, as well as use the hashtag OEB Slow Read to communicate with each other that way. So that's another way that you all can connect with the lounge not being available this time.
Those are all of our socials. And I think that is the last slide. So thank you, everyone. Sade, you can release the slides now. Thank you very much. So thank you, Sade, for being our tech whiz today. And thank you, everybody, for participating in the slow read today. We really appreciate that you have come with us along this journey, and look forward to the end of the Patternist series in July. Definitely think about what you need to end the series, and you're welcome to share that with us, because it's a big deal. We're going to be moving on to a whole other world. So we will be saying goodbye to Doro and the pattern and everything. So think about how you'd like to do that, and feel free to share that with us. Isis, Tati, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close?
I do want to share with this group, there is another slow read that is happening that's being led by Chloe over at Thistle and Verse on YouTube. They are doing a slow read with two other, and one is Sherry from Obsidian Text and Tangents, and I cannot remember. Can you remember the
There's
third?
like there's a whole bunch of posts.
Oh, there are 5. Okay,
there's
I
like
can't
a lot
count.
of them.
I can't count. What is math? But they are doing a slow read of the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. They have already begun, but it is a slow read for them in a way, in a manner as well. They're reading through the 3 novels faster than we would read through 3 of Octavia Butler's novels. But it is available if you would like another #1 science fiction, Black science fiction author to read and to read in community. That is another avenue that is also available. So I wanted to share that.
Cool, this was awesome. Thank you. I dropped the link to Thistle and Verse YouTube in the chat in case you're interested. And yeah, have a great Sunday.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. Those of you who are in the States, enjoy your holiday tomorrow.
Thank you. Have a good day, all. Peace and blessings.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.